started. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on today's webinar regarding added staffing. Won't take very much of your time. Just a reminder, only the chat box is available. We have disabled the Q&A to try to streamline those questions coming in, as well as make it a little more efficient in finding those questions between two boxes, and is a little more difficult than just that one. So if you have questions, submit those there. If possible, please make sure you you submit those at a minimum to all panelists. Do not send your questions about the content to just the host. That's going to come to me, and I'm just going to tell you, you'll probably want those answers from Rhea or Lucas rather than from me. So with that, I will turn it over to today's presenters to let them introduce themselves, and we'll get going.
Thank you so much, Heike. My name is Bree Evans, and I am the statewide risk prevention coordinator. I'm also a licensed behavior analyst, and I'll let Lucas introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lucas Evans. I'm also a behavior analyst, and I'm the Central Area Behavior Analyst for DD.
So today we're going to talk to you about added staffing and why it should be more than just a warm body. So again, just a little housekeeping, and please mute on entry and then use the chat box if you have any questions, like Heike said, and make sure you submit that to everybody or to Lucas rather than to the host. So today we really want to help identify, to know how to identify whether you need added staffing, and then learn strategies, if you do, to help staff and the person that they're supporting be successful together, and then what resources we have to help you beyond just added staffing. And we're also going to start off by talking a little bit about why added staffing is a risk category here in Missouri. So Lucas, if you want to start us off by talking about why is added staffing a risk?
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about risks associated with staffing, and I'm also going to talk about added staffing as a modification from typical of a person's life. So let's start off with modification from typical. So modification from typical means that the typical person out in the community doesn't have staffing, and specifically there's a certain level of kind of staff that comes along with being in residential service and DD. And when you have above and beyond that, you have more than typical levels of staffing for residential services. And more than typical, or a modification from typical, is the way that CMS talks about rights limitations. So we would call them rights restrictions or rights limitations. CMS calls them modifications to a typical life. And if you all have seen the recent webinars on the CSR, 9 CSR 45 3.090, which is the behavior support CSR, it talks about that additional staffing, for whatever reason, is a rights limitation, is a modification from typical. And that's true no matter what the reason is. So whether it's for medical or behavioral, it's still a rights limitation because you're doing above and beyond what the typical residential person would get. So why is it a rights limitation? Well, you are adding extra staff or extra people, which is not something that a person commonly would have in their home. And typically they're doing things like observing you, so you might be limited on the amount of privacy that you would have. They might be making sure that you don't do things that aren't unsafe for you, which could be behavioral things, like so you're not sticking things in your mouth, or it could be medical things, you're not pulling tubes out. Either way, they're kind of limiting your ability to kind of do things freely, and so it is a rights limitation. And we do these things. So again, that added staffing is a rights limitation doesn't mean you can't do it. So let's just start off and make sure that everybody understands that. Rights limitations are allowable in waiver settings. You just have to follow all the things that go with using rights limitations, which includes affording people due process and going through all those steps. So there are many reasons to need additional staffing. We're going to talk about some today. But one of the common things, or the kind of thread that holds them all together, is it indicates an additional riskiness or some additional risk for the person. So you need this extra staff around to help because the person is at risk of bad outcomes if they weren't there. They're at risk of harming themselves either accidentally or on purpose, and they need extra staff to supervise them. They need help with their daily living stuff, and so they need somebody there. So they're kind of at risk, and they need this extra staff to kind of help them with their risk. In the DD system, we look at additional staffing as a risk indicator, and we specifically get really concerned about wanting to know how we can help when individuals start having more than 720 hours a month. So that would be about one-on-one, 24/7. So if a person has 24/7 one-on-one, then we really want to know kind of how we can make sure that's effective, and other things that are in place in addition to staff, which we'll really talking about today. So that's just kind of trying to level set with everybody to make sure everybody understands that when you're using more than typical staffing, that's limiting somebody's rights. And the reason why it's a limitation is because you're doing something above and beyond that you wouldn't typically do, and that usually is because you're addressing some sort of risk. The other thing that we know is that typically staff are used as kind of like a Band-Aid for behavioral challenges, which means we don't know what else to do, so we just throw extra staff at it. And that's really kind of the main reason why this training exists, so that we can start identifying that we're using staff as Band-Aids and what we can do in addition to Band-Aiding the problem.
Thank you, Lucas. So the first step, if you think that an extra person is necessary to help the situation, is you would want to do or need to do a risk assessment. And we have some screening tools to help in doing so. We have a risk screening guide, and we also have an enhanced staffing review form. And what this form does is it really helps the team problem solve around the need for added staffing. And then also to take data. And one of the key things with taking data is knowing what kind of data. So not just frequency data or a count of how many times a problem behavior is happening or how many times the person needs help. Instead, we're thinking that we actually need contextual data, which might be things about times of day when staff might be needed, special circumstances, so an event or a scheduled activity where they might need extra staff rather than all of the time. And Lucas will talk a little bit more about data as well. And when we post this, all of these tools that we talk about will be linked for you guys.
So thanks, Rhiannon. She mentioned that there are different types of data that would give you different information, and I think she said it really well, that you're really trying to narrow down kind of what's happening when the problems are occurring. So first you figure out why you need the staff, and then you start figuring out what are the other things that are happening around it. So is there a particular person that happens to be on duty when challenges happen? Is there a particular time of day that things are worse? So I'll give you a perfect example. So maybe you find that after meals, particularly, the person struggles a lot and is much more likely to get irritable and get physically aggressive. So one of the things you might find as you're utilizing your staff and you're taking data is, gosh, it's always around mealtime, and you happen to talk to your nurse, you mention it to the doctor, and they say, well, I wonder if he has acid reflux. Acid reflux is one of those things that is commonly associated with irritability and aggression. And so being able to take data around times of day that challenges are happening can give you some idea about what other things might be going on that you can address. It might be related to special events. So Scatterplot is a really good tool, and that really all it is a grid that has, the easiest way to look at it is it's kind of like your calendar. So if you have your days of the week going across the horizontal or from left to right, Sunday through Saturday, and then you have the hours of the day going down, starting with whatever seems reasonable at the top. Maybe it's 6 a.m., which is when the person normally gets up, going down to approximately when they go to bed. And when things happen throughout the day, you're just marking it in the hour in which it occurred on whatever day it was. And then doing this a few weeks, you can start to see if there's patterns. Frequency just means counting it, just counting how many times it happens in a day. And then you can kind of group that together in weeks and months to see, is it happening more or less than it used to? We also, I want to make sure we get questions as we go through. And I saw that there was one about due process committee. And Jennifer asked the question, should all plans that contain enhanced levels of staffing go through due process committee? So what I will say to that is, if staff is above and beyond what's typical for the residential service, then that seems like a modification of the person's life, which seems to be meet the definition of a rights limitation. And you can't just make a blanket statement about everything. And so you would have to think a little bit also about what's the purpose for having the staff. How does the person feel about having the staff? And so I can't give you a solid answer, but I would be considering whether it should go through. I would be thinking about whether it meets all those components that would indicate it needs to have due process. So if you're limiting a person's rights to privacy or anything above and beyond what's typical in a residential service, then I would say, yeah, it needs to go through the process, which again, due process committee is just the last part of the process of due process. It's not where due process happens. Due process happens all the time, every day, when you're thinking about what a person's rights are and you're making sure you're honoring those. And due process committee is just the look behind to make sure all that stuff's happening.
So if you've done your risk assessment, you've taken data, and there's been identification that, yeah, you do need an extra person there to help the situation, then what we say you need is not a warm body. You need a behavior coach. So you need someone to help the person know what to do, and that staff needs to do with the person, not for the person. So they need to be coaching the person, especially if it's for added staffing for behavioral needs. Then that added staff needs to coach the person on what behavior they should be doing as an alternative. And these are some things that we recommend go along with added staffing: the safety crisis plan, person-centered staffing, engaged staff, flexible schedules, defined schedules, skills teaching, and then continuously taking data. And also fading staffing. So it's not that the person's always going to have additional staffing. What's the plan to fade staffing in the future? And we're going to go into these in more detail.
Okay, so safety crisis plans, what are those? The easiest way to think about a safety crisis plan is it's just a set of things that you can do that are preventative, that are likely to prevent a challenging situation from happening, or if a challenging situation does happen, it's the things that you do to get through it as safely and quickly and positively as possible. That's really all it is. It's just a plan of things that, because of what we know about the person or what's happened in the past, we know, or we have a good reason to believe, are likely to prevent a challenging situation from happening. Or if one were to happen, these are the things that in the past have worked or we think will work to make the situation resolve as safely and quickly as possible. So this could include, or should include, several components. So the first one being recognizing what are some warning signs that you would see in the person. So how would you know that you're about to get into a challenging situation? So what are their tells, or how, if I walk into a room, how would I know that that person is getting geared up or getting ready to have some challenging behavior, or that their day has turned poorly? Like, what are the things that I would see to know that that was happening? And the reason why that's important to know is because you have to be able to communicate that to staff that are coming on. Hey, this is what you look for. And most of the time we already know this, but having it down in a plan helps it become more than just a verbal history of the person. It becomes a written history, which is easier to transport, it's easier to train. It's a good refresher for staff. If they forget or if they get pulled, they have that as a quick reference. The other thing is to recognize what situations have led to challenging situations in the past, or have predicted challenging situations in the past. So this could be, you could think of this as like trigger situations. So things that if they happen, you know, based on what's happened in the past, that this is going to be a bad day, or things are going to go poorly. Maybe it's a family member agreeing to come visit and then they don't show up, and this has happened over and over in the past, and you know that if they don't show up, then that's going to make the person very upset, and could turn into a really challenging situation. Maybe it's when they find out that some awesome event that they had pre-planned isn't going to happen now. Like, I don't know, maybe there's a global pandemic and stores are closed and they can't go to the one place that they really want to go to. So whatever those situations that happen that you know, based on what's happened in the past, are likely to lead to challenging situations. And then the challenging situation is important to describe on what is it that the person does that's so challenging, that's serious, that makes us have to respond. Do they become physically aggressive, and what does that look like? Because there's a million different ways to be aggressive. So what does it look like for this person? Do they hurt themselves? Again, what does that look like? There's a million ways to hurt yourself. Same thing with breaking stuff. So it's really just thinking about what does it look like for this person and what should I do? And there's a couple of big implications when it comes to safety crisis plans. So the first one, well, both of them are related to the behavior support rule, which is the CSR that I mentioned earlier. I just want to make sure that people understand that all of these things are connected. So the CSR actually defines situations in which safety crisis plans are required. So if you have additional staffing, you should consider this tool. And you should recognize that it might be required depending on what has happened. So if you ever do anything in response to a challenging situation that limits somebody's rights, you have to have a safety crisis plan. That is a requirement based on the behavior support CSR. So that means, based on what we've talked about so far, if you consider that adding additional staffing above and beyond typical to address a challenging behavior is a rights limitation, and you do that in response to some problem, you've now come into a situation where a safety crisis plan is a requirement. So these things are very important to consider and to recognize that they may be a requirement. They're not a restriction. Having a safety crisis plan is not a restrictive intervention. It might contain restrictive interventions, but it's really just a written document of the things that you've done in the past that have worked that you should do again. And it helps for people to recognize if things don't work, to not do them again. So again, it's just a set of tools or strategies that can guide staff's action. And there's a ton of resources on our website. They're linked here in the PowerPoint. So when you get this after attending today, you can get to a template, an assessment, and you can also get some trainings that have been done on safety crisis plans. They're incredibly important. Just one last analogy so I can beat this horse completely to death. It's kind of like having an evacuation plan for fires. You know the route that's most likely to get you out safely based on past experience of what you know about the building, and you know what you're supposed to do if you have a fire. It's just that except for behavior. There's really no reason not to have one. because it's just preparing. It's just thinking ahead and having a plan in place. And the last thing you want to do is be trying to figure out what to do in the thick of the crisis. You don't want to have to try to figure out what to do, or you don't want to be that direct care staff having to figure out what to do in the situation, because something's going to happen. Something has to happen. And so the more that you can pre-plan, the better. The other thing that's important to think about with safety crisis plans is it might include some physical crisis management. So you might have a step in there if behavior is completely out of control. It's somebody's engaging in physical aggression where they're seriously hurting another person and it's continuous, that physical crisis management may be indicated. Those steps should be in there, including at what point you should consider using it, what are the techniques that should be considered to be used, what shouldn't be used. All of those things should be in there. And again, it's just a plan to make sure people stay safe.
Next, we talk about person-centered staffing. And really what this is think of it like a Match.com for staff and the people they're working with. So the last thing any of us would want to do is spend the majority of our time with a person that has no similar interests and we don't get along with. So having person-centered staffing really gives the person a voice, giving them the ability to choose their staff. You could also utilize or create some matching tools to help match staff to a person that they might be more successful working with.
The other thing to think about is, in addition to having the person have a voice in who staffs them, who assists them throughout the day, is staff should be engaged. And that means that staff should not just be off by themselves, or shouldn't wait around for a problem to happen before they kind of get involved and start interacting with the person. They should be interacting with the person frequently throughout the day, specifically when things are going well. And one of the things that sometimes happens is sometimes staff could benefit from having a little bit of training or some maybe some help on how to start conversations. So believe it or not, sometimes people just struggle to have conversations with other people in general. So it's hard to know how to go up out of the blue and start a conversation. So sometimes people can benefit from having some practice. And sometimes there are certain individuals that are harder to support than others because they have limited interests or they're kind of hard to approach. And so specifically in those situations, it's really helpful to have a cheat sheet or some sort of guide on how do you go up and have a conversation with this person. So it's more than just what are the things that this person likes to talk about, but how do you start having a conversation with Johnny? How do you start having a conversation with Susie? And throughout the day, hopefully the person's doing activities of daily living, hobbies, all sorts of things, and staff can do those things with the person. So again, the staff's not there to wait on the person and to do everything for the person. They're there to do with the person, hopefully helping them become more competent in doing those daily skills and leisure skills. And so they're there to be engaged with the person. And it makes the day go by a lot faster if staff have some expectations and a busy day to hang out with the person rather than just, sitting around waiting for something to happen.
Schedules are also really helpful and important so that staff know what it is they need to be doing throughout their shift rather than just sitting around surfing the internet on their phone or waiting for the individual to prompt what should be done. So really having a daily schedule with specific tasks or things that the staff should do each hour listed out is really helpful for staff to have a vision of what their day should look like. And then also making sure that that schedule balances flexibility. So if the person that's being supported decides, no, I don't want to do this activity. What else could they do? Are there choices built in, and clear actions for staff around those choices? And then the person should also have a schedule with choices of things that they could do each hour. Those things should be fun. We suggest having, if there are tedious things that need to be done, make sure the tedious things are done first, and then having the fun activities follow that. That way you're paying off doing those less enjoyable tasks. But in general, they should have lots of choices on things that they enjoy, and then maybe earn something for doing those less preferred tasks as well.
Okay, let's talk about clear expectations. So this is related to lots of the things that we've already talked about. So how many of you have ever worked a job where you showed up and you didn't know at all what you were supposed to do? If you can remember, if you've ever had a job like that, you probably remember feeling really confused, maybe frustrated, maybe like it wasn't worth doing. I would have to imagine that that's how direct care staff feel when they don't know specifically what they're supposed to be doing. Or if the only expectations they have are around documentation and keeping clothes clean and all that kind of stuff, that's probably the only thing they're going to spend their time doing. So clear expectations includes all of those things that you hope that they will do throughout the day, which includes helping come up with a daily schedule with the person, being flexible on what that entails, being engaged and doing with. And then once you have all of these expectations, the cooking, the cleaning, the driving, the teaching, all of those things that they could or should be doing, including things that they shouldn't be doing. So if they're supposed to be observing the person because the person engages in so much challenging behavior that they need eyes on 24/7, and they shouldn't be cooking and cleaning and driving, then that needs to be outlined in expectations. And these should be preferably written expectations, just because it's easier to talk about and refer to when something's in writing rather than, again, if it's a verbal history. So once all those things are established, this is going to allow for house managers and professional managers and even the service coordinator to come in and be able to see that things are happening as they're intended. So once you figured out ahead of time what should be happening, the staff have those expectations, that the individual has expectations about what they should expect from their day, so they know what staff should be doing and not doing. This is going to let supervisors and service coordinators come in and be able to know when they show up that things are happening as they're intended. And if they're not happening as they intended, that provides an opportunity for professional managers and house managers to do some coaching of themselves, so they can be the behavior coach for staff. So it doesn't mean yell at staff. It doesn't mean get angry at staff. It means identify what's happening now, what should be happening instead. If you need to do some retraining or reminding, and then helping make sure they know how to do it, and then recognizing when they're doing it correctly. It also means that if you show up and things are going well, it means recognizing that things have gone well and it's contributing to a good life for the person.
All right, I think we tend to miss this one the most. So we talked earlier about having that behavior coach for the person, and this is really where the teaching comes in. So we want to make sure that we're teaching specific skills, things like social skills or functional communication. So what if the person is engaging in problem behavior, and that's why we have added staffing there, what is that replacement behavior that we want to see happen, that replacement skill for problem behavior, and then have that behavior coach, have the added staff pay off whenever they see that replacement skill happening, or model that replacement skill for the person. And then we want to make sure that we have, and we talked about schedules earlier and having choices, but I think this goes back ties in with skills really well too. You can add in to your daily schedule specific skills teaching opportunities. And these skills could be taught naturally during things like active hobbies. You can teach the person how to make their own schedule, how to make choices, how to have fun exercise opportunities, how to have a healthy day or a healthy life. These are all things that could be built into the schedule that are teaching skills to the person, rather than just having passive things in the schedule like video games where we're losing out on a lot of teaching opportunities. When we talk about teaching specific skills, we really want to make sure that it's pre-planned by the entire team, not just up to the added staff or behavior coach to figure out on their own in the moment. That's not going to be as successful as having a team approach where it's well thought out and planned and put together and built into the schedule by the whole group ahead of time. So really pre-planning with the team is very important. And if the person has something like a behavior support plan, then tying those specific skills in and making sure the behavior coach, the added staff, is trained on what skills are in the behavior support plan that they should be looking for and modeling and paying off. And when we say paying off, we mean making sure the person is recognized for performing whatever good behavior or skill we're looking for. That could be things like praise. It could be earning something extra, maybe access to something they don't normally have access to, whatever you have built into their ISP and plan.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of things that you can do, and once you have kind of sat down and thought about what things make sense and you've done something, now you need to figure out, is it working? So this is where that data stuff comes in. So you've got to have data at the beginning so you can kind of figure out what it is you can do to kind of make the situation better. And then when you have a good idea of what might make it better, then you still need to take data because you need to know, is it working or not? So a lot of times what happens is we try things and then we do them for a while, we don't take any data, and then we just kind of sit back and we're like, hey, is this better or not? And really what we go to is kind of probably our last experience with the person. And if our last experience with the person was good, then things are getting better. And if it was bad, then things are getting worse. And the problem with that is that's just one moment. And without a greater context of kind of how the person's doing over a longer period of time, we can't really say things are getting better or worse. So what I mean by that is, yeah, it could be true that the last interaction you had with Johnny was awful and things are still getting better because it's longer and longer periods of time between bad days or between challenging situations, or maybe it was a challenging situation, but it was much less severe than it has been in the past, and he's only had 2 this month, and last month he had 5, and the month before that he had 10. So even though you had a bad moment, things are still getting better. And on the other hand, maybe you had a really good moment the last time you were with Johnny, but overall things are getting worse. So maybe that was the only good day he's had this month, and last month most of the days were good. And the only way you can know, again, greater context, more than just a single moment, is if you're taking data to see over time, how are things going? How many challenging situations have happened? Is it still certain times a day? Is it different times a day now? And if things are going better, now you can start thinking about what can we do to work on additional objectives that we have. So maybe we've taught some skills, but there still needs to be some more teaching happening. So how can we start working on the additional skills now that we're solid on the first skills? If we're not really needing to learn more skills, then now we need to start thinking about how do we start fading back on the additional staffing. So staffing above and beyond what's typical should be viewed as a short term. That doesn't mean that every person that we support will ever get to just typical staffing, but we should always be thinking about that. And so what can we fade back? Can the person have some alone time? What does that look like? How can we start slowly and build? Maybe complete alone time is too much, but maybe remote supports is a way that we can start introducing something that looks more like privacy, but also have that remote monitoring capability so that we can respond and assist if we need to. So what are the things that we can do to start promoting a person's independence and really just noticing and building on the success they're having? Now, if things are getting worse, don't fade staffing. Figure out what you're doing, figure out what you think's not working, make a change, and then try it again. And then you just continue to look at the data. It's just this constant rinse and repeat. You look at the data, you see what's not working or what is working. You try to do less of what's not working. You try to do more of what is working. You see what happens. If it doesn't work, you make another change, and you just keep going on and on until you start finding success and move slowly towards not needing staff anymore.
I think another thing to keep in mind when it comes to data and your staffing plan is making sure that you're taking fidelity data. So are staff following the plan that you've built correctly? Are they teaching those skills at the times that they should be? Is the schedule being followed? Are just making sure staff are getting the support that they need to be successful. So if the plan's not being followed, maybe we need to retrain, maybe we need more frequent check-ins with staff to give them some modeling and feedback of what they should be doing. And then also, like Lucas mentioned earlier, making sure when staff are following the plan that you really pay that off for staff as well. So praising staff, and maybe they can have something they can work toward earning as well. These are some other things that might be helpful for you, and we'll have these linked as well on when the slides are posted. So tiered supports is a consultation process that helps you build positive strategies that improve quality of life and also helps you figure out how to get those strategies used and implemented. And I could go on and on about tiered supports, but I want to make sure we have ample time for questions. So I'm going to just stop with that, and it'll be linked, and you can go to our website to find out more. The Behavior Support Review Committee is where you can go to problem solve specific strategies for high-risk behaviors and to kind of help figure out how well the behavior support plan is designed and what are some other things that you could try. With employment, we're thinking that if you utilize employment services, then the person can have a better life, they'll have a better economic status, more social outlets, and purpose to their day. Counseling is really important, especially if they have a history of trauma, which most people that we support do. So counseling might be something necessary. If the added staffing is for behavioral reasons, then we always suggest starting out with a medical evaluation because it could be something medical going on that's contributing to the behavior. Maybe they have really high thyroid levels or something that can have behavioral effects. Lucas mentioned earlier technology supports. So maybe instead of having two-on-one staffing, you could have one-on-one staffing with remote supports. So these are just some things that we think would be beneficial to try in addition to added staffing if you think that staffing is necessary.
So can I add one more thing before you hit next steps, Brianna?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I think just to kind of bring it all back together, I think the best way to think about additional staffing is additional resources or additional tools. By themselves, staff don't help because they're just more resources. It's how you use the resources. It's how you put the staff to work to help the person, and that makes the situation better. So just authorizing additional staff that by itself doesn't help the person. Just put an additional body in the house doesn't help the person. Not having clear things for those people to do doesn't help the person. Only when you think about how you're going to spend these resources, these additional resources, you use these additional tools, what are they going to do, can that actually be helpful? And a lot of times what you find is you need other resources besides just staff as well. So you need additional services that are specialized that can meet other needs that additional staffing can't meet.
Absolutely. I also forgot to mention community integration. So making sure that the person has a meaningful day beyond just what's inside of their home. And I know with COVID, it's a lot more difficult to work on that community integration piece, but maybe there's some virtual things that they could do. I know a lot of museums and places are doing virtual tours. There are a lot of chat group Zooms that have opened up where people can get together and just talk about similar interests that they have. So making sure that they're able to have opportunities with peers and that social outlet beyond their home as well. And that added staff person can help facilitate that. Some next steps is to look for additional webinars. So this is one in a series of 3 webinars so far. So we'll have them the next 2 Tuesdays in October. And then we're building some virtual workshops to go along with these webinars, as well as some Tier 1 universal strategy workshops that are available, and we'll link those too for you. And then we also have the Provider Support Committee, which starting in November is going to be a sort of like a learning community for residential providers to come together. We'll have a real short didactic presentation, so a real short PowerPoint for you. And then we'll leave it open for you guys to ask questions and maybe talk about what's working well for you around whatever our subject is. We'll have a theme each time. And we'll be there to provide professional consultation around that theme and any questions that you have. And it's really open to any residential provider that wants to call in. And it's the first and third Tuesday of every month starting in November. And that will, the login info and more information on that will be linked. So now we have about 15 minutes left, and we wanted to leave some time for you guys to ask questions. Is there anything we talked about today that's kind of fuzzy in your brain, floating around, that you want more clarification on? Maybe there are other things that you've tried around added staffing that might be helpful for other people on the call to hear about. Or maybe you've tried some of the stuff we've talked about today and you've found like, hey, it's not working. These are things that are stopping it from being successful. If you guys have anything you want to add or ways we can better help you, please put that in the chat box. Or if you want, you can unmute and just have a conversation with us.
Actually, unmuting isn't just as easy of an option like that. That option's only available for panelists to unmute themselves when we're using the event center. So, sorry.
Oh, no worries. Thank you, Heike. My bad. Use the chat box. Jamie asked, will all the documents we discussed today be available and where? Yes, all of the documents are already available on our website. If you go to MoDD tiered support, under Tier 2 and Tier 3 is where most of the documents are. However, we will have them linked when the webinar is posted. So you won't have to go digging around. We'll have them linked for you, and you can just click and it'll take you straight to it. And I believe, Heike, correct me if I'm wrong, that will go out in an email and then also be posted to the webinar page?
Excuse me, yeah, that'll go out in an email blast. So I sound like a broken record on this one. If you haven't signed up for our division email blast, please, please, please do that. So it will go out. We should have that within 48 hours easily. The email blast will go out, and it will also be posted on the previous webinar page. And then those documents, as we mentioned, are already available on the Tier 2 spot on our website.
So it looks like we have a comment from Kana. It says the due process has a section on their form about teaching strategies. Oh, it's a question. How do you suggest we work on teaching new skills to our individuals? That's a great question. And I'm actually going to step back a little bit from that. So part of the ISP process is a needs assessment. That's really where the ISP comes from, is you're identifying what the person needs. And then the next step is figuring out how you can help them meet their needs. And so this process around teaching skills is the same process that you would go through no matter what it is that the person needs in their ISP. So if it's around employment, they need to learn skills around it. You're probably going to be thinking about who do I know, what service, quote, hint, hint, can I get the person access to that knows about how to teach employment skills, because they can access pre-employment service. If it's about activities of daily living, it depends on specifically what it is. If it's how to use the restroom and maintain hygiene and cleanliness, who do you know that can teach that skill? And applied behavior analysis services might be that service that can help teach person skills necessary for toileting. If it's relationship skills that the person needs to learn, who do you know? What other services can help meet that need? If the relationships are about just interacting with people in the community, maybe community integration is the best service to help teach that person conversational skills for the community. If it's how do you talk to a person that you're interested in dating, maybe there's relationship classes that are hosted locally, or maybe a counselor can work with them on that, especially if relationship challenges are related to some past mental health concern. Maybe it's a behavior analyst that can help them learn how to talk to people. Do they need to learn some skills related to dealing with stressful situations and refraining from breaking things and beating people up? Okay, that's probably a good job for a behavior analyst to come in and look at what's going on in the environment that kind of sets up and keeps this cycle or this challenging situation from keeps it going, and what can be done instead, including what to teach in addition to making changes in the environment. So that's what I would say, is it really goes back to that needs assessment and then looking at what are the services, what are the resources that you have that can help those needs get met. I think that's the easiest way to answer it. I know that's not a really good specific answer, but it's really just about highlighting and identifying what are the resources and sources and services that you can tap in to meet those needs. So it really just depends on what the person needs.
And Jennifer put a comment in here that's very helpful. She says that tiered supports can teach provider staff how to teach. And that part of the problem could be that staff don't see themselves as there to be teachers. And that's absolutely correct. So tiered supports teaches provider staff how to give instructions, how to model and give feedback to people, and practice opportunities, which is really, really important when it comes to teaching new skills. So that's where tiered supports can be a very valuable resource for you guys. Any other questions you guys might have? I don't know if people are typing them or not. Don't be shy.
Rhiannon, do you want to take the comment from Amber?
Sure. I'm assuming TSC is tiered support consultation. I'm not sure though. So I just want to make sure I'm answering correctly.
It appears, I think she's referring to one of the support committees, so either the Behavior Support Review Committee or the Provider Support Review Committee, Provider Support Committee, sorry, too many committees.
Okay. So it sounds like Amber is saying that folks don't know what the Provider Support Committee is or what the Behavior Support Committee is. Is that correct, Amber?
Let's just go with that's what it is.
Okay. Okay. So if that's what you're saying, then we are going to do a better job at communicating these opportunities directly to providers. So sending out personal invitations, making sure that it goes out in the mail blast so that if a residential provider gets the invitation, they will know what the theme is for Provider Support Committee before it happens so that they know which staff they might want to have attend, whether it be the direct staff that works with the individual or if they have a supervisor that they would rather have go that could then coach the staff on what they learn there. So I think that one's more on us and making sure that we're communicating more effectively with the committees and what is available for you guys, and we will do better.
Yes, and also just, you may have said this, Rhiannon, and I apologize, but it shouldn't be the direct care staff's, that frontline person's responsibility to get the person to the committee, so they shouldn't be the one that has to recognize that the person could benefit from a committee. That they might see that, they may suggest it, but it shouldn't be their responsibility. That's really the team's responsibility. And so if all of these things that are in place, that we talked about are in place, it'll become pretty clear pretty quickly that additional help is needed, and the team can reach out and get those things. So one of the things in having a pre-plan for all this stuff is that what you're really doing is taking a lot of the burden off direct care staff from having to figure these things out in the moment. And so they could focus on helping the person meet their needs and do their teaching and all that kind of stuff, so that they're not having to also worry about what else they need to be doing beyond just their day job of helping the person learn skills and have a really good, have the best quality of life that they can.
We have another question from Kay asking, how do conversations begin about matching staff and the individual? When should they begin? And who is responsible for those conversations? So I really think, and Lucas, feel free to jump in whenever, but I really think that when you're utilizing the enhanced staffing review tool, or when you're planning around and assessing the need for added staffing, is really thinking about who would be the best staff that you have to work with that person and why. So what are some things the person's interested in? And then interviewing your staff to find out, would they be a good fit for working with them? Lucas, do you have more thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I would say that it should happen as often as it can happen, or that is possible. So if a person's moving from provider to provider, that conversation and some thought should go into person-centered staffing at that point. And the easiest way to do it is just to involve the person themselves as much as possible. Now, I understand that it's impossible to hire specifically just based off what is the best preference of the person, because there's obviously compromises that have to be made. So you're trying to meet the person's preference as best as possible within what you have available. So I understand that it's not completely at the discretion of the person, but it should happen as often as possible. If you have staff roll over and you're hiring new staff, I've seen agencies that have added the individual as part of like a second or third or an informal review after the staff person's been hired, to give them a chance to meet people that may work with them and have a chance to say yay or nay whether they think that's a good idea. So I think as much as you can involve the person in their supports, the better. They may not have to legally consent to it, but they should be agreeing to the things that are happening to help them throughout the day. So that's again probably not the best answer, but it's as good as I got.
And also, when it comes to matching, I want to always think about tying in everything about the person. So if they have a trauma history and it involves sexual abuse, and it's a female person that was abused by a male, then maybe thinking about having a female staff work with them. That way, if they're having continuous staffing, they're around someone that they might feel more comfortable with. Well, I don't see any other questions coming through. We will hang out here for an extra couple minutes, but I just wanted to take the time to thank all of you for joining us today and for asking questions and listening to Lucas and I talk about this risk category. You guys are awesome.